donate up here after the event.
Is this a good height?
All right, thank you guys for being here. My name's Javen. I'm the founder of 29 North, producer, director, and also the host of the Ascent series. The Ascent series has been an ongoing series of events we've done here in Embark, highlighting different creatives in the Bend community, helping to provide them a platform to share their work. So we're here to do tonight with Christian. Christian and I originally talked about having this event pretty shortly after he started the project, so it's been a long time in the making. Really happy to have him here sharing his work and what he's been working on the last couple of years with the Soul of Skagit. I think most of you guys know Christian, so I don't need to do much of an introduction. He's a local photographer focused on outdoor conservation and environmental work. His recent book, which we are launching tonight with his Kickstarter campaign called Soul of Skagit. We are doing Kickstarter at the end of the event. If you guys feel called, please do donate and help launch his book. It'll assist with helping get prints made and helping to get this word out there and whatnot. So with that, without further ado, Christian. Thank you guys.
All right. Well, thank you guys so much for coming. This is an awesome moment for me because this project has been mine solely for the past 3 years. So to be able to finally share it is a massive relief and something I've just looked forward to for a long time. So thanks so much for being here on a frigid, cold evening with snow in town and whatnot. So I just appreciate you guys. So basically the reason we're here is the launching of my book, Soul of Skagit. So my elevator speech for this is this is the story of the Skagit River watershed from the glaciers to the delta into the Salish Sea beyond. And I'll go into why I chose the Skagit and some of the more nitty-gritty details about this project, but for now we'll just get warmed up a little bit. So a little bit about myself. I grew up in Miami, Florida, so super far from the mountains, and not knowing how to do pretty much any of the things that I had to do to tell the story of the Skagit River watershed. So that's kind of part of what made telling this story so rewarding, because it was such a growth process for me as well. So this project challenged me in ways that I didn't even know I could be challenged, and for that I can kind of only be thankful for. And as Jaden said, I live here in Bend now. Lived here for the past 4 years, and it's been such a great home base to sharpen my skills in the mountains and grow my appreciation for the natural world. So this project really came to life once the pandemic hit. I don't know if you guys remember, but there was a period of time where even hiking was off limits in Bend. And so just over the period of a couple weeks, what felt like my entire identity was under threat. I was like, I can't even go outside. All the things that I do traditionally as a release were not kosher anymore. And so I was forced to kind of refocus and pivot. And when I first moved to Bend, I was more concentrated on just getting out to as many places and shooting as much as I could and building a robust local portfolio. And that was all well and good. That served its purpose really well. But when the pandemic hit, that gave me the perfect opportunity to slow back down and ask myself how I wanted to reincorporate my long-term goals into my daily workflow. So the big question was, what was my next project going to be? You know, instead of thinking about what singular image I wanted to create, I wanted to start thinking about what story I wanted to tell. And at the time, my wife and I were living in our 280 square foot tiny home. And so I started the research for this project in the Skagit. And one of the reasons I chose the Skagit is because the project I did right before this was based on the high altitude subtropical glaciers in Bolivia. And this project taught me so much. It was kind of the foundation of me learning skills that carry into the mountains and into the alpine. And it also really cemented my desire for wanting to tell stories that represent the impacts of the natural world due to climate change. And glaciers are kind of, for me, the bread and butter and a great place to focus that narrative. But when the pandemic hit, obviously travel is off limits. So it was a good opportunity to pivot that angle towards something a lot more local. And living in Bend was the first time that I ever was somewhere that glaciers were actually quite accessible. We have glaciers in the Three Sisters wilderness, and so I knew I wanted to tell a story about how glaciers affect our regional ecosystems and our lives. In the Pacific Northwest, yes, we do have great wilderness areas, but many people live here. Many big companies operate here. So I wanted to find a story where this relationship between the natural world and the glaciers was magnified to a point that I think would resonate with a lot of people. So fast forward a little bit, I started doing a bunch of research on the Skagit, talked to a bunch of glaciologists and geologists that have been doing glacial studies in the region. And I got in touch with Andrew Fountain, who's a professor at Portland State University. And after reading one of his research papers that highlighted how glacial melt might affect stream flow in the next 80 years until 2100 as a result of climate change. And I talked to him, I was like, hey, where should I point my lens? And he was like, you should go to the Skagit. And I was like, I don't know what that is. I've never heard of this river. Honest to God, I've never heard of this river. Had no idea what I was getting myself into. But basically, he said, this is the most glacially affected area in the lower 48 by far. And when he said that, I was hooked. So then I spent the next 2 years going up to the Skagit. It was 6 expedition-style trips. And this involved backpacking, hiking, mountaineering, kayak touring, underwater photography, kind of just testing me in many different ways. But one of the ways that it was the most special is that I got to share this incredible place with some of my favorite people. So this was my first backpacking trip with my dad, my only backpacking trip with him. And that was my first trip up to the Skagit, and from then I was hooked. I was like, man, this place is absolutely nuts. So I definitely knew it'd be worth spending the next couple of years there. This is a shot of my buddy Wade. He's one of my good friends and my climbing partner in the Alpine. And some of the moments in Skagit were like this, where you can tell the air is still, the skies are clear. It's just like a perfect day. And then other times it wasn't as perfect. Even something like this looked like, wow, this is just such a beautiful place. But it didn't always come easy. Kayak touring for 4 days on Ross Lake. I'd never been kayak touring before. I'd never kayaked with 100 pounds of gear for 4 days on end. I got slapped in the face with how difficult that was real quick. And this was a moment that I was able to share with my wife in the Skagit. If you look down kind of middle right, you can see our 2 sleeping bags down there. The original plan was to sleep in a fire lookout, and we got up to the fire lookout, and there were some travel nurses raging at 10 in the morning. They're like already drinking boxed wine and having a great time. And they're like, oh yeah, we're sleeping here tonight. And I was like, cool, so that means we're not. And I convinced my wife, well, we'll definitely sleep in the fire lookout. Worst case scenario, it's gonna be a beautiful day. We'll just open air baby, totally fine. And because it was a beautiful day and there was no wind, there's an infinite amount of mosquitoes. So it was too warm to actually be in the sleeping bag, but too many mosquitoes to be out of the sleeping bag. So I mean, but that's kind of the magic of it, right? Like this place pushes you in different ways, in unexpected ways, and anyone that's spent any time up in the North Cascades, the weather changes really quickly up there, and you can go from a lovely bluebird day to pretty dangerous thunderstorms rolling in, snow in the middle of summer. So yeah, this is kind of the past 3 pictures that are shared, not only a little bit about the background of how I went about telling this story, but also to share how much of a privilege it was to share this place with some of my favorite people. So with that said, this is the video that I made for my Kickstarter, and if I tried to explain this stuff to you now, I don't think I would do as good of a job because this took like 12 takes, each of which were really awkward for me. So I'll just play the video like I've been talking, and then we'll go from there. Hi, my name is Christian Morello, and I want to introduce you to my latest Kickstarter project, Solo the Skagit. For the past 3 years, I've been working on telling the story of the Skagit watershed, the glaciers, through the forest, all the way to the delta. Now, I need your help in bringing this project to life. I'm curating a beautifully printed book that is inspiring, humbling, and also representative of the greater challenges that rivers all across the world face. When I tell people what I've been working on, many ask, why the Skagit River? The Skagit is actually one of the greatest rivers. Yet, few people outside of the Pacific Northwest have even heard about it. We pass through some of the most remote wilderness in the US, yet millions of people still depend on it for sustenance, livelihoods, and recreation. The river is full of juxtapositions like this. Between glaciers and power generation, salmon and agriculture, forest and lumber. Pretty quickly we can see how this region is filled with relationships that make this small pocket of the Pacific Northwest so valuable, but also so complex. I chose to focus this book on the connectedness between the various elements that rely on this great watershed. This approach can help us develop a holistic understanding of the Skagit and how we can preserve it for future generations. The need to develop a holistic understanding of our natural world is more critical now than ever. The glaciers and waters of the Skagit are rapidly transforming through climate change. Their perspectives drive this book can not only help us address the future of the Skagit, but also help us develop a realistic and sustainable approach to conservation throughout the world. Soul the Skagit is filled with some of my finest work today. Countless hours of research, hiking, paddling, and climbing went into capturing thousands of photographs, nearly 100 of which are in this book. My writing not only gives these photographs context, but it also informs in a way that I hope will blow you away with just how special this mystery is. The money from my funding goal will go directly towards producing the first print run of this book. This will allow me to self-publish this book with a great quality, still an affordable rate. By backing this Kickstarter, we'll guarantee that you get the book at a significant discount, at up to 30% off this price. I'm also offering 10 limited edition photographs from the book, which you can get first dibs on just by backing the higher reward tiers of this Kickstarter.
Also, 4% of the funds raised in this Kickstarter project will go directly towards organizations doing fantastic conservation work in the Skagit as part of my For the Planet initiative. The one thing this Skagit has taught me is to tell its story and share its resources with balance, love, and respect. This matriarchal river shows us how these three themes are carried throughout its journey, from the North Cascades all the way to the state of Skagit. That is why it's so fulfilling that I get to encapsulate this beautiful place in one book and share it with you. Let's bring this project to life and feel the soul of the Skagit together.
All right, well, I don't know if it's the techno rave music or watching myself on camera, but I am pumped up now. So, wait,
My name is Christian.
sorry. All right, so now I'd like to share one of the chapters in my book with you guys. I'll kind of cycle through the images as they kind of appear in the book. But just a little bit about the book as well. This is kind of like a prototypical copy. It's not printed by the printer that I'll be using. So, you know, you guys can take a look at it later with some quality issue here and there, but it was more to kind of get my hands on the book, work out some of the kinks, and to have something tangible to show you guys tonight as well. But this book is ordered by elevation, so we're going to start at the alpine zone and the glaciers and mountaintops of the North Cascades, and work our way down to sea level, which carries us to Skagit Bay, Puget Sound, and the Greater Salish Sea. So the chapter I'm going to read you guys, 515 feet. This is kind of right in the middle of the watershed, right after all the dams in the river, and right before the river kind of gets to the more residential part of the Skagit Valley. So with that context, I think that's enough to get us started. And I hope you guys can tolerate 10 to 15 minutes of me just talking at you guys. All right. Below the three dams of the Skagit, the river runs wild. Here, salmon is life, law, and order. Nearly every aspect of the Skagit below the dams is influenced by this iconic family of fish. A salmon cookout is always on the calendar at the Marble Mountain Community Center. Native folklore abounds with stories about salmon. Between late summer and early winter, the rushing waters fill with these iconic fish surging upriver. As they come to the end of their life cycle, they return from the ocean to their birthplace in the Skagit for one final push to bring new life into this watershed. Just as important as salmon are to the Skagit, so is the Skagit to the salmon. The Skagit is the only river in the continental U.S. that hosts all 5 species of Pacific salmon, plus steelhead, cutthroat, and bull trout, which are also salmonids. The 5 Pacific salmon species include Chinook, sockeye, pink, coho, and chum salmon. Each of these species is unique in their appearance, spawning seasons, and even the gravel beds and tributaries they spawn in. Chinook are by some margin the largest of the salmonid family, growing upwards of 130 pounds. Even at the average adult size of 30 pounds, they rightfully earn their nickname king salmon. Aside from their sheer size, Chinooks are plain in appearance, spawning with relatively muted brown coloration. Pink salmon are the smallest of the 5 species, only reaching about 5 pounds. What they lack in size, they make up for in style. Spawning adults develop rich red and green hues. Males take this mate-attracting decor up a notch, developing a large hump on their backs. This makes the humpies easy to spot as they swim upstream through shallow areas with the dorsal fins exposed. Pink salmon are not alone when it comes to fish fashion. Sockeye salmon resemble a mistletoe with the depth of their cherry-colored bodies and green heads. Coho are slightly larger than sockeye, but also have similar coloration. Where sockeye carry the red coloration through the dorsal fin, the red of spawning coho transitions to a brown and spotted back, more closely resembling the trout of the salmonid family. Lastly, chum salmon are the second largest in the family and are distinctly identified by olive green and purple blotches on their sides. Each of the salmonids in the Skagit play a role in the regional ecosystem. As salmon venture far upstream to lay and fertilize eggs to sustain their own species, they also sustain a myriad of plants and animals throughout the watershed. Skagit salmon in their various life stages provide food for over 137 species of wildlife. For example, bull trout and sea-worm cutthroat feed on the nutrient-rich eggs of early season spawners like Chinook and pink salmon. Nothing better illustrates this life cycle than the link between salmon and bald eagles. In early winter, bald eagles migrate from Canada and Alaska to feed along the fertile shores of the Skagit. One of the largest populations of wintering bald eagles in the U.S. is supported by the late spawning coho and chum salmon. After the salmon have exhausted their last energy reserves swimming upstream, bald eagles capitalize on the fish that wash ashore. Each eagle fills up on nearly a pound of salmon per day. The leftover fish carcasses end up strewn up across the riparian forest floor. Younger eagles specialize in this behavior. In order to avoid competition from larger adults, they have developed a habit of bringing their catch away from the exposed gravel banks and into the dense trees. The salmon remains dropped onto the pine needles and sword ferns, then decompose into the fertile soil. With the help of insects and fungal networks, the fish nutrients are absorbed into the fungi, then distributed to the root systems of the surrounding plants. Nitrogen is one of the most valuable nutrients that salmon provide in this act of reciprocity to the trees. Although nitrogen is plentiful in the air, plants lack the ability to use this type of nitrogen to aid their growth. In the Pacific Northwest, many trees rely on the salmon trace nitrogen compound 15N. Trees are able to use this ocean-derived nitrogen as fertilizer when salmon decay on the forest floor. Such is the interdependence of salmon and forests that tree growth strongly correlates to the size of salmon runs in any given year. The more salmon in the river, the more nitrogen their carcasses provide to the soil, and the more trees grow. Western hemlocks and red cedars carry that trace of salmon into the heart of their growth rings. In return, they provide shade over the drifting waters of the river, keeping the water cool for the next generation of salmon to thrive. And so the fish pay it forward, completing the salmon's replenishment cycle by decomposing and giving one last bit of life back to the watershed of their birth. This is perhaps where the soul of the Skagit lies. In this watershed, no calorie is wasted, no purpose is futile, no element exists in isolation. Just like the old growth giants, humans depend on salmon as well. Today, the Skagit is a major fly fishing destination. On a weekend day in the summer or fall, countless fishermen cast their lines from the gravel shores or from drift boats. Despite its reputation as a legendary recreational fishing river, steelhead and chinook are no longer abundant enough to guarantee legal fishing for the species. Fishing regulations change annually depending on the health of fish populations. Most years, fishing is catch and release, giving the fish a chance to replenish dwindling stocks. For some people, catch and release fishing is enough to quench their thirst for sport. For others, it is the denial of a right. In 1855, amid pressure from white settlers and the U.S. government, tribes throughout the Pacific Northwest signed the Treaty of Point Elliott, conceding the vast majority of ancestral lands to government and private land ownership. In return, the tribes were promised federal health care, education, and the right to take fish from their traditional waters. For thousands of years, the practice and sustenance of salmon defined the culture and identity of native peoples along the Skagit. Such was the influence of that relationship that they could be pressured into conforming to the new American way, so long as they could continue to fish the Skagit River in perpetuity. The ability for the Skagit tribes to fish in their traditional waters depends on the presence of sustainable amounts of fish. Over the years, however, the spawning fish populations have steadily declined. In the 1980s, sockeye in the Skagit faced virtual collapse. Puget Sound Chinook and bull trout were both listed as threatened species in 1999. Puget Sound's steelhead followed suit in 2007. Even the relatively healthy populations of pink salmon only return to spawn in the Skagit in odd number years due to their 2-year life cycle. As a result, native tribes have struggled to keep their nutritious food source and fishing culture alive. Many of the traditional fishing methods have been lost. If there's any hope for both salmon and the native people that depend on them, it may be the resurgence of the sockeye salmon. After the construction of the Lower Baker Dam in 1925 and the Upper Baker Dam in 1959, sockeye populations fell precipitously. Before the Lower Baker Dam was built, roughly 20,000 sockeye spawned each year in Baker Lake. By 1985, the number plunged to under 100 fish. Neither the lower nor upper dams were originally constructed with fish passages, blocking the sockeyes' access to lakes upstream. Unlike other salmon species, sockeye only spawn in tributaries connected to lakes. In the early 1990s, the tribes and the general public began pressuring Puget Sound Energy to alter their dam operations to prioritize sockeye population restoration. After millions of dollars of investment and years of research, a fish taxi was completed in 2008. This system essentially traps the sockeye below the Lower Baker Dam, then taxes them in a truck to be released upstream into Baker Lake and Lake Shannon. At first glance, this innovation seems extremely rudimentary. However, paired with spawning habitat creation, these solutions have drastically increased sockeye runs. In 2015, a record 32,736 sockeye were recorded in the fish taxi contraption, marking the successful restoration of a species whose hope was all but lost. This sort of resurgence allowed the Skagit tribes to harvest thousands of fish, something they had not been able to do in generations. Instead of admitting defeat to the sealed fate of the iconic sockeye, an unlikely coalition of people committed to finding a solution. It took both public and private resources, paired with innovation, dedication, and cooperation between the public, tribal leaders, industry, and government. Now this invaluable piece of the ecological puzzle has been restored. A similar feat of cooperation may be required to restore the population of the threatened Chinook and steelhead populations. Since being originally listed as threatened species under the Endangered Species Act, Chinook have been under the microscope of native tribes, conservation groups, and sports fishermen alike. Salmon are a cultural symbol and a part of the identity of the people of the Pacific Northwest. Of the salmon, Chinook is king. It is often used as an indicator species to judge the health of the entire Puget Sound ecosystem. Since the Skagit River produces 60% of the Chinook in the Puget Sound, a single season of low Skagit Chinook production can significantly threaten the future of the entire species. Chinook salmon are the largest and one of the longest living species of salmonid. These are both their biggest strengths and their Achilles heel. The size and health of seafaring Chinooks is largely determined by their first 12 to 18 months in the Skagit. Chinooks that are able to stay in the river and its estuaries longer generally have a better chance of reaching maturity in the Salish Sea and beyond. Key to the Chinook's ability to grow are the side channels and natural features along the river that protect the tiny fry and parr from larger predators. Mild floods help fill side channels and create additional rearing habitat for the vulnerable salmon. However, significant floods such as 33-year or 100-year flood events can destroy unhatched eggs and drag the fledgling salmon out to sea before they develop a fighting chance. Rising water temperature poses yet another long-term danger. Chinook spawn in the fall when glacial contributions to meltwater are near their peak. Although glacial meltwater is forecasted to increase in the Skagit until the mid-2100s, it will then decrease exponentially until the end of the century. Then, few glaciers will remain to replenish the Skagit with their ice-cold waters, a potentially catastrophic consequence for Chinook, whose eggs are sensitive to temperature and will not hatch in warm water. Still, the Skagit remains one of the last great strongholds for this threatened species. With the cultural, nutritional, and ecological value of Chinook salmon, restoring their population to sustainable levels has become a priority across the Pacific Northwest. Millions of dollars have been spent on potential solutions, including habitat restoration, fisheries management, and dam impact studies. The effectiveness and implementation of each solution is often fiercely debated. Regardless of the debates inside boardrooms, town halls, and courtrooms, the Skagit reveals how every species of salmon is just as connected to the forests and mountain peaks 8,000 feet above as they are to the river delta, now only miles away. That's it. Thank you. All right, now it's just question time if you guys have any.
Yeah, where are the headwaters of the Skagit?
So the headwaters of the Skagit start in Allison Pass in British Columbia. So yeah, about 50 miles east of Vancouver. And there's a EC Manning Provincial Park. That's the headwaters of the Skagit. And the river is quite small up there. And unfortunately, due to COVID travel restrictions, I actually couldn't go to Canada for any of this project. So the book is mainly focused on the American portion of the watershed. So Allison Pass is the start of what's formally recognized as the Skagit River. But you can look at really any of the glacial fields in the North Cascades also as headwaters to tributaries that go into the Skagit. Yeah.
What's the biggest thing you learned about yourself?
Biggest thing I learned about myself. I think it's that while I genuinely do love photography, for the sake of creating beautiful photographs, I think it's that my biggest passion is the storytelling component. So creating one-off images that might sell to magazines or as prints or something, that brings me joy definitely. But being able to put photographs, in this instance, words as well together to tell one complete story that means more than anything.
What was your process like for coming up with the book, the various chapters, and when you're out there, what was your thought process for finding those images to match the book idea that you were developing?
Yeah, that's a really good question because really I went the first 2 years of carrying out this project not knowing what form it would take. So I was like four or five of my expeditions in before I even knew, okay, this has to be a book. Because I got to a point where basically, after each expedition, I would go through all my images. And one thing I knew from the beginning was that I didn't want to pick just images that showed singularly beautiful things. I wanted to pick images that showed multiple things interacting with each other to highlight the relationships. So I kind of had that internal criteria in my head, and then I was looking at how many photographs I had, and I was like, man, this is not a gallery show. It's not a magazine article. I could trim it down certainly, but really in order to communicate the message in the way that I want to communicate it, I need to start writing a lot, and I need to put these images all together in one place. And contrary to most of my work as well, I knew I didn't want it to be something seeking the world of fine art. I wanted it to be approachable, and I wanted to put a book together that would be equally as home in a school library or on your coffee table. So I wanted it to be educational and beautiful. But yeah, so it's kind of somewhere right there in the middle or towards the end that I was like, yeah, this needs to become a book, and that's when I started writing. And then I used my last couple trips to kind of fill the gaps of, okay, where do I still need to create photographs to fill the gaps of writing, because there's stuff I really felt was important to write about that I hadn't had images yet. So those last two expeditions were pretty key to fill those gaps.
So in that instance, when you're decided it's a book, a book is a really structured thing, but a book like this is made up of completely spontaneous, unstructured moments. So when you went back up knowing I need to fill in certain gap, was that more stressful because you kind of knew what you wanted to shoot, but you didn't know where to go to get it or how it would shape, or would you get the conditions or?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So even though I took a bit of a backwards approach to it, like I didn't start with the idea of a book and then go from there, I did know what story I wanted to tell. So it was kind of just more like the magnitude that dictated the platform that it would be shared as. But definitely, man, those last two trips were really high pressure, especially the last one, because later on in the book, when I talk about the river delta and where it meets with the Skagit Bay and Skagit Sea, I talk about the relationship between the salmon and the southern resident orcas. And I felt like I couldn't write half a chapter about orcas and not photograph orcas. And so I spent like 4 straight days on my kayak in the middle of the bay. Like, I hope I'll find one, like.
Did you?
So after 4 straight days striking out on the kayak, I was like, yeah, even though I write about how not great whale watching tours are, I should probably, I just kind of calculated that as doing more good than harm. But yeah, you can ask any members of my family how much I hate tours. So like you have to trust me when I say that I was like a last resort. But from the kayak, I was able to photograph a couple gray whales, but they, as cool as they are, they just weren't really a part of the narrative that I was writing about. And that was another key thing. Is like there's so many, like this book could have been a textbook. It could have been like 5 volumes, but I wanted to keep it in a format that was palatable enough to be an entertaining read and kind of just hone it in on just several of the topics that I think highlighted the interconnectedness of the watershed.
Outside of the connections that you had with nature and the animals that stimulated you to think about your book, did you have any memorable, besides going out with me, of course, did you have any other human components that stimulated interest in what you were doing?
So I mean, this project started unlike many other projects I've done for me, in that I started with talking to people because I didn't know anything about Skagit. I didn't even know it existed, right? So I started the process talking to mostly professors and researchers that have been working in the area in various fields. And so right off the bat, I was able to form relationships that helped me learn so much and were really humbling, because like I consider myself fairly educated, and I started reading these research papers about ice worms on the glaciers. And I'm like, I don't understand half the words in these research papers. Like, I don't know how anyone reads this stuff. But in actually carrying out the project, one story that stands out in particular was being able to photograph the sockeye harvest for the Upper Skagit tribes, considering that was something that, fishing for salmon in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, they could get arrested for, and they were denied their own right. The fact that there are fish that they're able to fish for, and that it's something that can provide their families and their community with nutritious foods. And then also, they go on and sell the rest of the fish to markets, and that's a pretty big economic event for many of the families as well. So the fact that they let me in to photograph that, and brought me out on boats with them, and sent me home with a couple fish, that was a pretty special experience.
Does this make you want to move to Washington?
As you can tell, my family's here from Seattle, coming in strong. if it didn't rain, I might think about it. No, I mean, the North Cascades are like, I mean, I'm very appreciative of the mountains we have here, but like, the North Cascades are just like an endless playground. And yeah, I can see myself spending a lot of time up there. But we're gonna have to do something about the seasons. Maybe climate change will come in and make it a little more tolerable up there. Yeah.
What was the most enjoyable part of the project and what was the most difficult?
Again, I think one of the most enjoyable moments was on the second day of kayak touring. I kind of like got over the plateau of being like extremely sore. Like you get to a point where like you're gonna be that sore, but you don't really get more sore, and that's actually like a really great feeling. And there's just like, so I was kayaking in Moss Lake, which is a 23-mile lake, which goes from the just north of the Canadian border, 23 miles south down into the U.S. And so I kayaked 13 miles up the lake and 13 miles back down, and did some hiking along the way as well. But you know, that was the sort of thing where it was like I was on a boat, I was alone, I didn't see any other people except for the fire ranger at one of the lookouts that I hiked to. And I think it just like this area just like beckons for you to be alone in the woods, in nature, on a lake, you know, with waterfalls cascading thousands of feet into the lake. And there's just something about that that allows you to reach another level of connection with yourself and with the world around you. That's just very difficult. That feeling is very difficult to access in any other way. So yeah, there was a moment, you know, I had like music blasting on my speaker and I'm just like paddling and just like belting out songs, like singing horribly, but yeah, I was just so happy, so.
And most difficult?
Oh, most difficult.
Or was that both?
No, that was, yeah, that was hard. No, most difficult was definitely down climbing Kloawati Peak with my buddy Wade. We're on like fairly sketchy terrain, and so like coming down is like first you start on like third class terrain, and the rock is really, really bad. And then you go to fourth class scrambling where the exposure is pretty severe and the rock's still pretty bad. I was like, hey man, maybe we should set up a rappel or something. And Wade's like, yeah, you know, this rock's not really that good. Like, I'll just keep going down a little bit. I'm like, all right, yeah, but you know, if you see anywhere that we can set up a rappel, that'd be great. And we get down a little bit more, and then it's like fifth class terrain. I'm like, all right, Wade, we're setting up a rappel. Like, I'm putting my foot down. Like, I don't want to down climb anymore. This is sketchy. And so we set up a rappel. Wade's the first one down, just buzzing along. He gets to the bottom. I go to rappel down, and my belay device locks up on the rope. And this was a hugely educating experience for me, you know, in not knowing just a plan A, which I would say now that I didn't know my plan A very well, but I didn't have a plan B or C either, and I would do things very differently now. So basically, stuck like 100 feet off the ground, straddling a very sharp rock, and just like holding on to the anchor we built and like trying to play with my anchor, trying to get it to work, but yeah, it was malfunctioning on me. So I needed to unclip myself and just down climb fifth class terrain in mountain boots, which isn't the most secure feeling in the world. And that was a moment of like, oh, you can't screw up. Like, it's not just like you should screw up. It's like, no, like you absolutely can't. So that was a moment of like, Yeah, hope I don't have to tell my parents this story. I did. Here we are. So, yeah, that was difficult. Yeah, so not necessarily from like a physical perspective, but like from a kind of wrestling, the thoughts in my mind and keeping control of things. Yeah. Anything else? Are we good to continue the party? All right, well, with that said, get to grab some more beverages that are outside. There's beers in the cooler, sparkling waters in the bin. But in here, I have set up 7 of the 10 limited edition photographs that are part of my Kickstarter. So I wanted to select photos that were representative of the watershed from the glaciers to the sea. So these are all printed as 16 by 24s, and they're running in editions of 50 in 3 different sizes. So 150 copies total, which is representative of the 150 miles that the river runs. So, yeah, so, let's just take some time, grab a drink, mingle. Thank you guys so much.
Everybody just wants to grab a couple of chairs. There's a little chair right outside the door. Clear the room for space to hang out.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate it.
Welcome to the snowiest